So, authentication providers. You can create authentication provider, also new authentication provider. Of course, you can create it through console. So yesterday, as we saw on providers, if you click on new, it will ask for some credentials. Okay, then you can key in those things. If you are having OID authenticator, then you need to enter these information. What is the host name, port? Okay, principal is nothing but the super user for OID. Yesterday while installation we saw ORCL admin is the super user for OID. Credentials, then your user-based DN. So this is user-based DN. All my users will reside under CN equals to user, DC, US, DC, Oracle, DC, com. This is an example. Okay. And my groups will be based under this. So you will be mapping these groups. You will not be extracting everything from AD. Okay.
Correct.
So in AD there will be a folder called as groups. Under those, all your groups, new users, new employees, whoever are joining will be created.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So only these will be mapped. Like okay. So this way you can create a new authentication provider in your WebLogic console. You don't forget to reorder, because if you create and if your OID authenticator sits at the last level, it's of no use. So this reorder is important. If you want OID authenticator to supersede other authenticators, then you have to bring it to up.
Okay, so it doesn't go one by one. It just checks the first one. So.
It of course goes one by one, but
Then
your OID
shouldn't it be-
authenticator will be at the last level. Okay. And there are flags associated with it, as I told, prerequisite, requisite, required, sufficient.
Correct.
Those flags also you have to set that way. We will see those flags ahead.
Okay.
So you need to develop authentication providers. Why doesn't my default authentication work? Okay, so my WebLogic has provided default authenticator. Why do I need other different LDAP, authenticators? That is because first thing, also it depends upon your company standards. Okay, if they are having multiple ADs with them, okay, and if they want that, they want only one repository, that is AD. They don't want their users to information to get leaked to some another product. Some clients are very choosy about all these things. Okay, they don't want their data to flow out of their organization. So in that case, you will have to set AD authenticator. Okay, in few cases you will need LDAP repository. So in that case, you will have to put your identity asserter, okay, LDAP authenticator into your system. Okay. Likewise, there are Windows authentication provider also. The users will be cross-checked across their Windows login through which they are trying to log in. Okay, so there are these different kinds of providers which you need to, you may need to integrate with your WebLogic. And WebLogic authentication provider channel gives you the option to integrate those. Okay. Next is configuring. We saw how to create a new authenticator. But while configuring a new, these are the flags which I'm talking about. You need to set these flags. Okay. So the topmost one will be required. 1, 2, 3, 4 levels. Okay. Topmost one will be required. This is like this authentication provider will authenticate user. It is the must one. If the authentication succeeds, it will again go to the next level. Okay, it does not matter if the authentication succeeds or fails. It will come first, of course. Okay. After this, it will go to the next list of provider. Okay. Requisite. Requisite is something which is always called authentication
Okay.
provider. Okay. And just like required, these are like these requisite and required falls into must category.
Okay.
Okay. If such authentication succeeds, subsequent providers are executed. Okay. But can fail. If authentication fails, control is returned to the caller. So requisite is something where if fails, then it does not go ahead. It will come back. Okay. Sufficient is like user is not required to pass the authentication test of the authentication provider. Sufficient is like it does not check. Okay. If the authentication succeeds, control is returned to the caller and the subsequent will not be called. And if fail, again it comes down. So that is sufficient is somewhat opposite. Okay. Required and requisite authentication provider must pass its own authentication test. If no required or requisite authentication provider is in the list, then the authentication test of at least one optional or sufficient must pass. So, if the user is passing its credentials, okay, and if I have at least one required in my list, so that needs to be passed. That needs to be succeeded. Okay, if I don't have required, then at least requisite needs to be passed or succeeded.
Okay.
If I have both, then at least requisite needs to be succeeded. And if I don't have required and requisite, at least my sufficient needs to be succeeded. Okay, or optional. Again, an optional user is not required to pass the authentication test. Okay, whether it succeeds or fails, next provider will be taken. And if this is the last, then the request will go back. But in case you don't have required and requisite, sufficient and optional user needs to pass at least one of these. That way.
Okay.
Okay, so these are the flags which gets associated with the authentication provider.
So these all 4 flags are associated with only one authentication provider. Out of these things,
all.
no. What my point is, so suppose I have 3 authentication providers. Every authentication provider will have those 4 flags.
Yeah.
Correct? You got you got what I'm trying to say?
Yes. You can set the 3 authentication providers to required also.
Correct.
Meaning
Okay.
all 3 are required. None of them should be skipped.
Okay. Okay.
That way.
So I can have my suppose let's say 3 authentication providers A, B, C. So A is required, B is sufficient, C is optional. Correct? I can do that, right?
Yes, you can do that.
I'm trying to understand. Yeah.
Okay. So overall authentication of the user succeeds only if required or requisite is succeeding. Okay. So if required and requisite are not there, sufficient or optional should succeed. At least one of them should succeed. Okay. And whenever you add a new authentication provider, so by default its control fact will be optional. You have to change that.